Hello and welcome back to the Cyber Live stage at Tech Live London for our panel discussion on operational technology, cybersecurity. And joining us are three eminent experts in the space. We have Simon Chasser, Chief Revenue Officer of Clarity. We have Ian Lillaby, who is the Group CISO of Sondix Group. And our third guest is Rob Dyson, who is the Global OT and IoT Security Services Leader for IBM. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Now, I wanted to start the discussion today really by finding out how you all became involved within the industry. So Simon, what's your story? How did you come to cybersecurity in such a big way?
Well, cybersecurity for me started when I joined NTT about 5 years ago, getting involved in multiple cybersecurity companies that they had acquired or divested to pull them together into one organization called Entity Security. Obviously, that sort of journey went through to a point where, having visibility on the IT security controls market and what was happening, I started to see a trend occurring with OT cybersecurity and IoT cybersecurity, and looked at that as my sort of next journey in terms of, well, this is the next big thing. This is the next impact to society in terms of this expanded and connected environment that is, unmanaged from an IT point of view. So I wanted to get myself involved because you're talking about availability of organizations when you're talking about the business continuity of having a secure OT environment. So that was my journey into OT.
Okay. And Ian, you are an eminent specialist in kind of blockchain and AI. What brought you to that?
Well, it was a bit of an interesting journey. I mean, for the last probably 10, 15 years, I've been in the energy and utility sector and dealing with various challenges, both in terms of the OT and IT environments, but also looking at things like grid decarbonization, but also looking at AI and blockchain as fundamental shifts in how technology and the role it has to play in the sector. And so that was what drew me into this particular problem domain, because obviously that brings with it, how can that help us address some of the security issues to better manage grid and related infrastructure.
I see. And Rob, you had a slightly different sort of entry point to cyber. Yours sort of began sort of back in the military. So how has that sort of impacted your journey, and where did it all begin?
Yeah, I have a long journey, that started with the military, as you point out. Back in those days, I was in a specialty that was information technology oriented. And so, they taught us a lot about cryptography as the security measure. But security was actually something that, was within scope. But then after my military time, and I went on and I was a software developer. So I was more into the regular, IT types of roles. Even data management and so on. It wasn't until I actually got introduced to a role in '98 with Deloitte that got me truly into cybersecurity. At that time, the focus was SAP security. And I've had that journey doing a variety of different things. Probably, if you look at, an ISO 27002, I've probably worked in every domain at one point or another. And how OT came up was I was the service line leader, global service line leader for IBM's security strategy, risk and compliance area. I built that up, and then it was kind of time for me to look for something different. And so I was appointed to be one of our first industry leaders, and it was, strangely enough, energy and utilities. And when I got into that, though, I heard everybody talking about OT. And in those days, which wasn't that long ago, about 2018, we hadn't even settled on a name. It was, ICS, Industrial Control System Security, a lot of SCADA security, and you could just tell, the maturity around this space was very, very low. So instead of staying with that theme of industry, I decided to pick up the OT and build that OT security services service line or business within IBM, and I've been doing that ever since.
Thank you, thank you. And now a question for you, Simon, and both of you, Ian and Rob, please do feel free to jump in. It's a discussion, conversation. So, Simon, to begin with, what major changes have we seen in the industrial Internet of Things over the past few years, and why is it that it has become such a massively targeted place to be?
Yeah, I think it comes down to organizations that are automating processes, optimizing production facilities, optimizing everything that they can by having to respond to demand, which is increasing through the fact that we're becoming more digital as a society. So in essence, there's sort of connected IoT devices that are easily connected to corporate Wi-Fi's and or IT networks with industrial environments and systems which are having to be interconnected. So, you think about like conveyor belts, for example, in a food production facility. You've then got a bottling controller, an automation controller. You've then got the fill-in agent controllers and logic controllers, which then decide whether you fill it with 7-Up, Sprite, or Coca-Cola, for example, for the bottles. Then you've got another system which is packaging that and boxing it up, and then you've got another logistics warehouse system which is coordinating all of this. And all of this connectivity is all about optimizing the speed to the door, effectively. And ultimately, this connected environment and this threat landscape has been seen as one where it's an easier target, I suppose, from a malactor point of view, because ultimately you're now looking at the availability of organizations to continue to function. And that means that you've got now a broader target and ultimately a addressable market in some way from the bad actors to go and compromise and impact. Whereas before, if you were looking at in the past, financial services organizations or insurance organizations or healthcare organizations to collect patient data or personal information and leverage that as a ransom and or leak that out onto the open web, for example. That monetary return was not as great as being able to shut down the production of a major automotive manufacturer, for example, because those things need to continue to work in, and everything that's connected in the supply chain to produce those vehicles every 30, 40, 50 seconds, is highly interconnected all the way through from where you are, going into the car dealership and putting in what sort of specification you want, that then gets filtered out to all the supply chain to make sure that when that particular chassis in the bright pink color that you've ordered turns up at that point on the production line, that it's getting the right wheels that you want, the right mirrors and whatever else. And that interconnectivity means that availability as an organization and an industry and the uptime is worth so much. And therefore, that's what I've seen now. They've moved to this targeting availability for the largest amount of return.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's this unique combination of factors when it comes to this interconnection. So if you think about the rate of advancement in digital transformation, when you look at some of the challenger banks in the financial services sector, and you compare that to, for example, the rate of change and innovation in the energy and utility sector, they are fundamentally at opposite ends of the scale. You've got an industry that asset plans and 10-year cycles, and so how can you suddenly massively accelerate that? Then you look at how cloud technologies have advanced. Now you connect the two together, and you've got this complete mismatch in terms of maturity levels of security. And then you combine the fact that the more valuable the targets are, the more incentive there is for bad actors to come up with new ways. So you look at the emergence of ransomware as a service. Okay, I no longer have to go and invent my own ransomware. I'll just go and subscribe to this and use that to target somewhere else. So it multiplies your risk exposure while bringing these two. So it really is a fascinating kind of junction point.
Yes. So.
Yeah, my 2 cents on that is, isn't it really an exciting time just to be working today, because we're just entering into a new age, right? So Industry 4.0, we are agricultural, industrial, information age, right? Now we're in this whole digitization, as they said. So it's pretty exciting when you really think about it, that we can participate in this major transformation around the world to leverage technology, to become more competitive, higher quality goods, just to serve, the world much better. But at the same time, with the introduction into more digitization into these industrial environments, they become more vulnerable, right? So then obviously we're going to have to apply security techniques to manage those vulnerabilities. And obviously, as Ian said, the amount of cyber attacks have increased tremendously, which goes along with the way, the world is today and the major threats that are out there, nation state threats and things like that. And so, you got this exciting time that we're all participating in. At the same time, we have to do that securely. And that's our role, right? To do that securely.
Correct. So, Ian, you specialize obviously in AI and machine learning and blockchain, among many other things. What's your take on these technologies and how they can help address the huge problems within cybersecurity?
Well, I think it's such a fundamental role because the scale with which everything is growing. And over the last sort of 5 or 10 years, and having worked with some of the US intelligence agencies and across Europe, one thing became clear: the amount of information, the amount of data available to us is overwhelming. And the only way we can possibly hope to keep on top of that and sift out the real signals, the real threat indicators, indicators of compromise versus all the noise is by using AI. And without that, we'll just drown. And so it's why everything we do, not only in terms of sophistication of the threat actors, but we have to put in place capabilities that can operate in this new environment. So, for example, in some cases where regulation is catching up and they're saying, right, in order to provide a stable grid, I need the ability to be able to shut you down or reduce your power feed into the grid. Great. But what if that is from a bad actor? How can that instruction be mimicked? Okay, suddenly I need real-time visibility of what happens inside my power plants. So again, when you think about, well, that's great in the context of just one power plant, but if I need to do that across 500 or 1,000 power plants, how do I do that at scale? That's where I need AI. That's where I need the raw ingredients of data, the blood pumping through the digital nervous system to be able to inform us and then help us deal at scale with these kind of new threat vectors. Absolutely, it's a fundamental part of the puzzle.
Sure. Of course. And Simon, many companies have adopted hybrid working patterns that's obviously exacerbated security issues massively. What are the biggest factors to consider when putting together policies and tools for network access to allow for secure remote access in that sort of situation?
Well, in an industrial plant, for example, huge. First of all, you're dealing with some plants that are in the middle of nowhere from a geopolitical, geographic circumstance. So, having to have someone create the right policies, the right access points, the right connectivity points, and to be sure that who is accessing the environment is the right individual. They've got the right permissions. Ultimately, they've got the right segmentation of what environment they can look at, so that you basically don't open up an area which creates a continuity issue on that production environment. And I think, with COVID, we've seen this huge acceleration to remote and digital working, and it's not just been within our own lives, but it's also been within the plant operators and the engineers that need to service those components within the various plants and facilities. So, having a secure remote access solution that is reinforced by a constant and monitored zero trust policy around how and who accesses what, when, and where is critically important. And especially when you think about, when I talk about the sort of just-in-time, I suppose, production, right, and the supply chain, from a business operational point of view, there's a really tight maintenance windows that are run because you've got huge production efficiency targets that are being driven down to these production plant owners, and therefore, they can operate within a very small window of basically taking down a production facility to do the maintenance, and therefore having all of those policies in place so that can occur at the right time within the right window is huge. I mean, I don't know about anyone else's view, but it's huge.
And again, you look at this mismatch, which I keep talking about. If you think about power plants, you have contractors that have to arrive on site and are used to just, well, I've got a 1-year contract or a 3-year contract to provide maintenance services. Well, that's great in terms of the expectation of, well, that means my credentials, if I want to access some of the systems, are just always there, and I use the same thing and never expires or whatever. And now you're shifting into the zero trust model where you have to assume that at any point a threat actor can try and infiltrate your systems. You have to have this fundamental mindset shift. You have to be able to have total transparency about who is accessing your sites when, and is that right? And are there any indicators that says maybe we should be investigating that a bit more? And this just requires, when we think about the technology landscape, about what are the solutions that we need to put in place, that plays a critical role, because without that today, you don't have a lot of those same protections. So again, yeah, it's a rapidly changing landscape.
I mean, I've got one where we currently protect about, I think, 140 wind farms off of the coast of Italy, and every day on this particular month, an engineer goes along off the shore on a boat to the wind farm and basically goes up to the top of the terminal and does the maintenance. And monitoring it, and they do it on this day every month, and they do all the farms. One day he was sick, so he went in the next day. And of course, with the right zero trust policies, it's like huge alert. What's happened? Somebody's actually accessing when they shouldn't be accessing it, and that creates another component, the human component in there too.
It's incredible, really, isn't it? I mean, Rob, in terms of your position at IBM, I mean, malware attacks to the industrial sector have increased 3,900% since 2013. That was a stat I found. If you could sum up 3 major factors that have caused that, what would they be?
Yeah, so why are the malware attacks or the cyber attacks increasing, at such a alarming rate? I'll start with number one is statistically those environments weren't attacked much. So it's kind of the thing of percentages. If you have 100% could be 1. So you got to be a little bit kind of thoughtful of the percentage. Now, but what is driving this malicious activity around these OT environments? Well, it's critical infrastructure. That's why. So that's number 2, right? The number 2 thing is the attack, the target brings a whole different kind of aspect to the attacker. And the attackers now are, criminal gangs and nation states primarily. They're not trying to steal data in most cases. What they're really trying to do is bring the environment down, right? They want to destroy the environment, prevent them from creating power, if it's energy and utilities, or creating their goods, whether it's, whatever it is, and especially if it's consumer goods, right? So foods, think about food, that could be a real problem, right? And so these nation states know that. And they know that if I can go in and cripple that economy, that I can win. I can start introducing, what I do to save that country, right? You kind of see the theme? I can say, oh, well, hey, and we know that China and we know that North Korea and even Russia, although Russia's a little bit distracted at the moment and focused on Ukraine, but they're a big attacker in the world. So you got those 3, and their whole political agenda is a lot different than ours and what we call the Western part of the world. So that's what's going on. And they also know, number 3, very immature environments. So we're getting into the Industry 4.0 and digitization of everything, and the mentality for security is so low. Even if they've got a powerful, very mature solution in their corporate environment, you spin around and look at their industrial environment, forget about it. They don't have all kinds of problems, which I'll be talking about in my next session.
And I think I'd like to pick up just on 2 points there. Your second factor around the nation states, it also requires a mindset shift in organizations to not just think about their company boundaries, but it's what's the interrelationship in the critical national infrastructure, the CNI space. It's about what are the onward potential impacts, so that your risk boundaries is not just about what is it to us as an organization, but it's what is our role to play in the grid. Yeah, and it's that end to end. And so that's a big change. And then your third point there around when you think about how do you bring together two faces of something in terms of the maturity, IT and OT, a big topic now is convergence. How do you bring the maturity levels of what we typically see in the IT environment and what we see in the OT to the same standard, so that you can better manage your overall security posture? So yeah, I agree, two very key points.
Yeah. So, Ian, so we're talking about the industrial Internet of Things, which really has adopted edge computing in a very big way. Does this make security at those endpoints more difficult, or is it more helpful? How is that?
I think it's more helpful, bizarrely, because it forces you to think end to end. You have to go down right to the device level. So when we think about how we manage our assets and our plants and our power production, we're not just thinking about what happens at a physical device in an inverter or a particular module out in the solar farm, but we're thinking about how do we communicate with that up in the cloud. So when we build decisioning intelligence in the cloud, we can enable it end to end, and by design, you're baking in the core security elements. So you're both addressing some of the traditional legacy security issues, but the new capabilities you bring in start to solve those problems. And that to us is a critical point of being able to operate at scale and to capture some of the efficiencies that Simon mentioned a bit earlier. Because unless you can operate at that scale, and unless you can enable the capabilities of IoT, then you're back to human intervention, and that's a costly scale factor. And what you want to do is use your people to pay attention to the things that matter, not the mundane kind of things that don't add much value. So yeah, I think that's...
I totally agree. I think, if you think about where we're at in terms of what Rob was talking about in terms of the Industry 4.0 and just what we've got now, but with technology and innovation and efficiencies in society and that digitalization moving so fast, we're very much on that cusp of that next level of what is the real end point? What is really the edge, the intelligent edge? And we're going to start to see things like, I think, smart cities where a traffic light, for example, will become an intelligent edge device. A physical system will become very much the physical intelligent edge, which will connect all of us in society, and whether it's crowd controls and fire systems and traffic lights and CCTV, etc. So, yeah.
Simon, you spoke in your earlier talk about an airport vending machine that had a back door that your company discovered was filtered through to Iran. And I think sort of scenarios like that are really quite terrifying if you think that there are so many tiny abilities to infiltrate a system. So, I think, are we winning the battle at this point, or is it very much two sides equally pitched against each other?
My personal opinion is I think we're behind the curve, but I think, as I spoke in my earlier session, this availability and this immaturity, as you heard from my panelists here, is in this environment, it's created a huge landscape of rich pickings for malactors, and whether they're criminal gangs that have been either state-sponsored previously or they've emerged out, they've effectively become very sophisticated because they've actually been capturing, through the ease of digital currency transfer like Bitcoin, etc. They've been able to capture a lot of money very quickly, very easily. That's been reinvested very smartly by them in their abilities to become even more capable and faster to react and act. And ultimately, with such a large and broad emerging landscape, which is immature, I think we're behind the curve. That's, as you saw from my earlier piece, 60% of organizations are just getting aware of ultimately this environment and ultimately what these assets are and how vulnerable they are, they're still evaluating what their inherent risk is. They haven't even got to a point where they've got to the residual risk they're happy to live with. So in essence, we've got to do more, we've got to do it faster. I think we've got to really improve our ability to respond and protect society and protect the industrial economy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also important to note that there's always this mixed bag effect. Because some people do it well, some people are very thoughtful about the security implications, and others are still playing catch-up because they are opportunistic. So I think back to between 2014 and 17, there's a couple of examples in terms of smart city initiatives, not only in terms of Sweden. IBM did a trial, I think it was in Italy, with a particular village where a lot of the population was actually negative population growth, but they had a huge healthcare crisis. So there was instrumentation of IoT. And then there was another example by a water utility in Italy. And in all three examples, in the IBM example, fortuitously, it was really robust design, but it was designed from security ground up. But in the case of the water utility, what they did is they laid out all this IoT connectivity and capability because they thought, great, this is a wonderful new opportunity. And but then they subsequently found that actually there was huge security holes. And so people were able to get access to information that was quite sensitive. And so there was another multi-year program to now go and fix what had just been rolled out. So it really is this mixed bag. You cannot just go into this. And I think fortuitously there's enough kind of awareness and understanding within the industry that that's in a much smaller percentage. But only 5 years ago, that was still a wide open field and a bit more of the Wild West, I think.
I would even say that it comes back to the saying secure by design, right? Ultimately, you've got to think about digital transformation with security in mind from the outset, because otherwise trying to bolt it on afterwards takes longer, and ultimately you're still trying to do catch up on compromises anyway and re-catch up. And ultimately, whether you're even in IT space and you're thinking, I'm doing application development, you want to start thinking about doing that black box and white box testing, testing the code from the inside and testing the running code from the outside. And then ultimately, how does that fall into your environment and how does that fall into your security policies? In the same way you think about the industrial OT environments and that sort of digitalization, think about security from the outset in that transformation. I think it's the only way to start to build secure by design environments.
I tell you, I like to really bring up a topic because there's, you think about the corporate world. In a corporate IT environment, we've been providing security strategies and implementing those for, 30 years now, ever since the internet, mainly, maybe client server before that. But yet today, we still need more cybersecurity professionals. We still are very busy, right? We still use consulting services, right? Why is that? Because our number one challenge is change. Change always makes these systems vulnerable, where you thought you had something figured out, and then the company changes. New technology, new people, maybe acquisitions, mergers, go on and on. Change. Change is our enemy in security, and I'm telling you, trying to stay on top of that is a CISO's nightmare. And now we're shifting this change to digitize my industrial environment. And you imagine, we got to do 30 years of work as fast as possible, right? And nobody's ready for it. Nobody's ready for it.
And change is bad in an industrial environment too.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is.
Well, I'm afraid we've actually run out of time now. Thank you so much. That was a really insightful and informative discussion. And we did actually have a couple of questions come in online, but sadly, we're not going to, maybe we'll pose them to you later, put them on the app for you so that you can get those answers out. But if we can just have a round of applause for our panel who did so well.
Thank you.